Thank you. The quotation from Machiavelli is that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. Thanks. He's offering advice to princes, that is, to political leaders, but surely he meant this advice to extend more widely or be more general in its application. In fact, it is meant to apply to anyone who is trying to achieve goals or aims that require cooperation of others. Now, as other people have pointed out, one clear implication of Machiavelli's claim is that it's best to be both feared and loved. Now, I'm going to dispute even that, but mainly what I want to do is to explain why I think Machiavelli's explicit claim is false. It's wrong. I think he's making primarily an instrumental claim, namely that whatever one's aims are, one will be better able to induce others to cooperate in achieving them if one is feared than if one is loved. But I think it's much more complicated than this. Being feared may actually be effective if one's aims are evil. But it may be difficult to elicit love from people in order to motivate them to cooperate with you in the pursuit of aims that are evil. For example, if a political leader wants to get people under his rule to follow his order and go off and kill large numbers of innocent people, it's unlikely that this leader can be loved or will be loved. Not very lovable sort of figure, I would say, to want to go off and kill lots of people. If, by contrast, one's aims are good or beneficent, seeking to instill fear in people to get them to cooperate with one is likely to be counterproductive. Among other things, attempts to induce fear will cause people to question whether one's aims really are good. This is because people who are feared precisely because they implicitly or explicitly threaten harm to those who oppose them or who disagree with them. And we're unlikely to trust in the goodness of someone who threatens harm to us if we disagree with him or if we oppose him, if we refuse to do what he wants us to do. When, moreover, we're motivated only or mainly by fear, and here I'm going to be contradicting what some people have said earlier, we're motivated reluctantly, and we'll look for ways to avoid doing what only fear compels us to do. By contrast, when we are motivated by love, we're motivated enthusiastically, wholeheartedly. We look for ways to ensure that we will be able to achieve our aims effectively and fully. Now, for the sake of illustration, consider the contrast between Vladimir Putin and Mohandas Gandhi. Putin's aim is to send large numbers of Russians to kill Ukrainians as a means of bringing Ukraine within the scope of his power. Many Russians who share his nationalist ideology no doubt admire him, but it's hard to imagine his actually being loved. I don't think those who admire him actually, or even those who fear him, generally hate him. He's not widely hated within Russia. But most of those who go to kill people in Ukraine and to die in Ukraine now do so from fear rather than love of Putin. Gandhi's followers, by contrast, were motivated by love, not fear. They took great risks to enable him to achieve his aims, in part because his own goodness assured them that his aims were just. And I should mention that I think the example of Gandhi shows, just incidentally, why Machiavelli was wrong to suppose that best of all is to be both feared and loved. If Gandhi had been feared, he would not have been loved the way he was. He couldn't have been loved the way he was. He couldn't have been loved the way he was if he threatened people threatened people with harm if they didn't do what he wanted them to do. I think one can't fully love someone by whom one is threatened. And so it seems to me that rule by fear and rule by love are not compatible. You can't join them together. You can't be both.
On a point of information, would the honourable gentleman not accept that squaddies in the British Army both love and fear their regimental sergeant majors?
It's no doubt possible in some cases, but in general, no, I don't think that's really possible. One either loves them or one fears them. One further difference between evil aims and good or just aims is that the latter are likely to be more enduring. Gandhi's aims and achievements have endured. But even if Putin were to succeed in winning the current war, he can't succeed in subduing Ukraine forever. His aggressive war has ensured that. Ukrainians in general hate and despise Russia now more than ever. They will never become part of Russia as a result of what he has done. He has undermined his own ability to achieve his own aims. So is it really better for Putin to be feared than loved? So I'm going to ask you a question now. Imagine that the fear of him and of his police and of his nuclear weapons eventually becomes so great that Russia wins the war and annexes Ukraine, at least for the remainder of Putin's life. And imagine that this reinforces his hold over power in Russia, and that the remainder of his life becomes, at least within Russia, one long celebration of his greatness. And imagine further that until he dies, he experiences great happiness, his principal desires are fulfilled, his ambitions fulfilled, and his life continuously suffused with pleasure. And suppose finally that if he had merely been loved by Russians but not feared, he would have had much less power and would not have been able to achieve the glory of victory. He would have been loved but not so ostentatiously venerated as I'm imagining that he would be in this hypothetical situation. So now imagine at the end of his life, could it be said that this hypothetical course of history that I've sketched was better for him, better for Putin? My view, and that of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, is that such a life would have been a dreadful life, not just for the victims of Putin's ambitions, but for Putin himself. I share with these philosophers the view that it is a fundamentally important element of a good life for a person that the person be a morally good person. I think that people who are evil and engage in horrifically evil action don't have good lives, however happy they may be. These are lives that are not worth living for those who live them. Let me illustrate this by asking you to imagine that you are a parent of a young child and you receive a phone call from your child's school. The person on the phone tells you there's been a rather terrible incident of bullying. One of the students has been very badly beaten up by a bully. The student who has been beaten up is in considerable pain but won't suffer any lasting ill effects. Is that the halfway point or the end?
Nearly the end.
Okay. All right. I'm nearly there. Thanks. Okay. And so while you're hearing these remarks, you wonder why you're being called. Are you being called because your child is the victim of the bully, or are you being called and told about this because your child is the bully? Now, what I think is that if you genuinely love and care about your child for your child's own sake, you'll hope that your child is the victim rather than the bully. You'd rather see your child's well-being reduced than to learn that your child is not a morally good person. So the lesson that I draw from this is that it's not good for a person to achieve evil aims. It's therefore not good for a person to be feared, even if that enables the person to succeed in achieving evil aims. It is, however, good for a person to achieve good or beneficent aims. But for that, being loved is instrumentally more effective than being feared, as I think the example of Gandhi shows. And being loved is in itself objectively good for a person. That's also an element of a good life for a person. So I think, therefore, in all respects, it is better to be loved than to be feared. And this is because not only of the effects on other people, but also on the effects for oneself. Thank you.